Bendy.
Hello, and welcome to Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. Now, normally on these podcasts, you first hear the indomitable voice of the incorrigible Waldemar Januszczak, art critic of the Sunday Times, but this week it's just me, the art historian Bendor Grosvenor. Waldemar is taking a break to catch up on some other projects, and rather than leave you, dear art lovers, without your weekly art historical fix, I'm going to try and hold the fort. Although I should also say that if the fort is a bit wobbly, it'll be because we are also without the services of our excellent producer, Thea, who normally edits everything together so superbly. So I apologize in advance for any audio-visual shonkiness. But I don't think a little shonkiness should put us off, because this week we have a great treat for you all. I am joined by my friend Simon Gillespie, one of the world's leading art restorers, who I've been lucky enough to work alongside for many years. Simon was an indispensable part of the BBC series Britain's Lost Masterpieces, which is also shown internationally as The Art Detectives. Simon's painstaking work was absolutely crucial in helping us find over 20 lost paintings by artists like Botticelli, Rubens, and Titian. Simon, thank you very much for joining us.
We had some really good fun looking at our collection throughout England and Great Britain, and finding things that are stuck away in the cellars, hidden away. One of the great things that has come out with of our social media and all that goes with it is the ability to actually create libraries of photographs. So all of these things are being photographed, and then down to you to go and look at the images and say, gosh, that's not just School of Antwerp. That is X, Y, Z. And then we'll go and try and prove it. I think we got away with most of them, didn't we? Except one.
Yeah, we had one or two knockbacks. I'm still a bit sore about that lovely portrait of Rembrandt we worked on in the National Trust House called Night's Age. Do you remember that one? Because you managed to peel back the background, which was had been added in the 19th century, and I remember watching you do that with a scalpel over weeks. So we might talk about some of those examples in more detail. We did have some successes, you're right, but I thought it'd just be nice to let listeners peer behind the green curtain at your world. As we start more generally, I would just love to know, I've said in the introduction that you are one of the world's best art restorers. I sincerely, in all the ones I've worked with, you are absolutely the best. So just tell us, what makes a good restorer? What sort of skills do you need?
It's patience, and it's also experience. Experience is everything. Use it and you apply it every single time. One of the things I love doing, and it gets me out of bed in the morning, and I think, what am I going to do today? And I look around at the list of things that have got to be done. It could be a Rembrandt, it could be a wonderful, Poussin or something like that. And there's a Turner sitting on a desk outside here at the moment, and all those things. And it has a good thing. There's also a bad thing about it as well. But I love the idea of getting out of bed and going to inspect one of my patients in my doctor's surgery like that, and seeing what I can do to actually make them survive. But one of the down sides of it is that I have to suddenly become an expert on that artist, and I have to read all the books, which I'm a very slow reader, and I need to understand what it is I'm looking at. But that's the experience of knowing how to understand something really quite quickly, what an artist was really intending to do, and think it through.
Well, let's talk mainly about old pictures, although if there's time at the end, we'll come on to some of the contemporary stuff you do, because I do want to ask you about, there was a large canvas once I saw in your studio, which was covered in bits of burnt toast, and for some reason it was terribly valuable, and you had to put a bit of toast back. So, but anyway, perhaps we should discuss that at the end, but let's focus on old paintings for the minute. You mentioned the skill of patience, and I can absolutely relate to that, because I am horribly impatient.
Yeah.
And I would just, if I'm sitting in front of a painting, cleaning it, like you do with your swabs and your solvents. I just want to go for it. And in fact, here at home, Ishbel, my wife, frequently has to take the swab and the solvent from my hand as I sit in front of a painting that's just arrived. But are you just naturally patient? Where does your patience come from?
I just know from experience how long these things take, and you just have to do it in the speed that the artwork requires. And yeah, it can be very laborious sometimes. And thank God I've got a team who are much more patient than I am.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that you have managed to stay the course with me, we've been working together for now, I think 25 years. So that alone is testament to your patience, Simon. Not many people have managed that.
Yeah,
But anyway, why don't we explain to the listener how we might go through a sort of a metaphorical conservation conundrum. Let's peel back a painting layer by layer and explain to people, first of all, what we see and how removing those layers changes how we see the picture, and then what you do in that process. Should we start, Simon, with let's take an old, I don't know, 17th century portrait, right? And I think most people in their mind's eye, if they can imagine an old painting, they will probably think it's a bit yellow. Old pictures are a bit yellow. And that's to do with the varnish. So can you just set the scene for us? What are we seeing there? Why does it go yellow? And why should we take that off if we should?
Yeah. As you say, most old paintings will have had a varnish applied, probably by the artist. And they always did have varnishes on prior to the 20th century. After that, people didn't want to have big, shiny pictures, so they left them unvarnished. So there's a different problem with an unvarnished picture getting dirty to an old painting which has this yellow hue. And we can talk about some people who actually loved that yellow hue, which one of them was Joshua Reynolds, one of our greatest portrait painters, who was fascinated with Rembrandt because he had this yellow color. Well, actually, Rembrandt did sometimes add a little bit of a yellow quality, but most of it was because those paintings were old with an organic varnish. And having an organic material, it oxidizes. And the way that an organic varnish oxidizes, it becomes yellow most of the time, and then it becomes yellow and brown and gets darker and darker and darker. And sometimes it even turns nearly black. And sometimes it can be varnished and varnished and varnished. And you've got layers of this stuff getting darker and darker and darker. And it becomes very difficult to see. And then on top of that, the old varnish, when it's in its oxidized state, becomes dull as well. So it's darkened and dull, means you really can't see more than the whites of the eyes. You can't see the feet because it's all covered in dirt and dust and discolored varnish. So the idea of removing that is normally quite a straightforward thing, but then you have to look very carefully, because if you start removing varnishes sometimes, and in the majority of, let's say, 17th century pictures, they've been through, as we call it, the mill sometimes, maybe 2, 3, 4 times.
So we are looking at our thick yellow varnish and our layers of dirt.
Yeah.
And you've got me sitting on your shoulder impatiently saying, come on, Simon, get out the solvents and break through that layer. Now, I always find that the most exciting moment.
Mm-hmm.
You must have done it now thousands of times, this sort of peeling back that initial layer. But every time I've done it with you, I've always been amazed at the difference that makes.
Yes.
You know, you look at a picture, you think, oh, I know what's going on there. I know who painted that. But even the slightest removal of that layer of yellow film can transform your understanding of it.
One of the pictures that I thought was really interesting was the picture that we did together for the show, which was the Rubens in Glasgow.
This was a portrait of the Duke of Buckingham, which was hanging third row up in Pollock House, just outside Glasgow, as I think unknown artist. And I walked in and thought, oh, that looks a bit like a Rubens. I took it to your studio, and then we got to work with it. And that was a fun one, yeah. But that you're right, the varnish on that was quite thick and yellow.
It was thick and yellow, and it was also slightly dull as well. And the effect of that is you couldn't really see into the 3 dimensions of his face or his skin. You couldn't really see the eye sockets clearly enough. You couldn't tell the full palette of colors. Um, and therefore, it's easy for somebody to get swayed, even though you could see it was a portrait, a rather a lovely portrait. But it's easy for somebody who doesn't understand the condition to say, oh, I don't know, or no, especially when it's got bits of overpaint on it as well. But that was a huge difference. Well, it wasn't a huge difference. It was a subtle difference, but it was a huge difference for art history, because underneath it, underneath the varnish, was suddenly popped up this rather fantastic and actually really nice condition portrait of a really important person by one of the best artists in the world.
Okay, so we'll come on to overpaint in a moment, I think, because that's when things get really fun. But you've started by saying that one of the essential skills of a restorer is patience, but you've also got to have nerves of steel, haven't you? Because when you're beginning to take your solvents through those layers of varnish, you've just got to be so careful. Because the same solvent could dissolve the paint layer as well, right? So how do you judge how far to go?
We always go through a box ticking system of using the weakest solvent and solution first, and doing tiny little tests, normally on the edge of the picture, which can easily be put back if we find way out of control. And then we get the sort of solution will get stronger and stronger, and we'll use more and more fierce solvents as we get into it. And we'll use different solvents on different parts of the painting as well. But we always carry out a whole series of tests. Sometimes when you see a picture that's ready to be cleaned and we've carried out our test, it looks like a doctor is marking up a patient for an appendectomy or whatever they're called. We've got chalk marks all over the picture, showing where we've done little tests. Sometimes dealers who think they know best will get a tin of a bottle of nail varnish remover, which is a very effective varnish remover or solvent. But they'll go straight for the signature or straight for the eye on a portrait. Why?
I have never done that, Simon. No slander
No.
to suggest I have. Now, I would say that most cases of painting that we worked on where the attribution has been lost and where experts have looked at it and gone, no, I just don't think that's by Rubens or Titian or Botticelli or whoever it is. I would say that most times that's because as you say, the underlying condition of the picture has made it impossible for them to judge, or it simply doesn't look like a Titian or a Rubens or a Botticelli. And in most cases, that's because someone has, through overcleaning or damage, then tried to add on paint to cover up that damage. And obviously, because they're not Rubens or Botticelli or Titian, it doesn't look like them. So this brings us on to I think the really interesting bit is dealing with overpaint. And you and I have seen some really crazy examples of overpaint in our time.
Yeah. I think one of the hilarious ones was that Jourdain's in Wales, that one of the best pupils from Rubens, a huge panel, ended up in Wales.
Oh, yes, in Swansea Art Gallery. Yes, lovely little museum, actually. Yeah, a painting by Jacob Jordans, which had been long disregarded as a copy.
Yeah.
Yes, and they'd really gone to town on that one, hadn't they?
Well, I would say Dulux. Somebody who was probably sold a lot of Dulux and he didn't really quite know what to do with the Dulux leftovers, so he used it to paint over large areas of this panel. One of the things that happens with blues, for instance, where you use them in the sky, they tend to discolor or fade. In the next picture, had all of its sky painted in a very bright blue, and a nude Diana, who was sitting on a rock, was painted rather demurely with something covering up her nudity, with a big pink dress. And I think one of the dogs had another leg or something. I can't remember, but it had ridiculous bits of overpaint on it. Yeah. Which brings me back to how art is perceived in history and also how it is perceived now. And I think I spend a lot of my time anyway educating, showing people that we don't need to make the things look perfect. It is okay to have a picture that's showing its age, and not to take out all the cracks and things like that. But in the 19th century, people didn't like that. As I said earlier on, they didn't like it. And they wanted to have their panels flat. So they added these very strange contraptions on the back to make them flat. Now we're more we're okay with having a panel that actually naturally bows because that's what they do when they dry out. That overpaint is not necessary anymore. You can just reduce damages to a acceptable level, and then it's old. We accept it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right to highlight it is often a question of taste, isn't it? So it wasn't just the nudity covered up in the Jordans that you and I worked on in Swansea, but for a long time, people didn't really like the concept of an artist's sketch or a study.
Mm.
So a lot of the paintings that you and I have worked on together have been artworks that were originally, for example, head studies in Rubens or Van Dyck's studio,
Yeah.
which were just kind of working templates for the original artist in the studio. And then after they died, people didn't think they were very valuable, so they would get another artist in to kind of finish them off.
Yeah.
And now, those over the centuries, those have lost their original attribution because experts quite rightly look at the head and go, well, I'm not sure that head matches that hand, for example, and the hand has been added in.
Yeah.
And now we begin to unwind them again because there's something about sketches and studies which sort of makes them feel very modern. It fits to our taste today, doesn't it?
I think it does, and also we want the psychology of how an artist works, and that's how you can really study. We've got a fantastic, as an example, Thomas Lawrence, great portrait painter, died at the beginning of the 19th century, I think. When he died, he had his studio was full of head sketches, preparatory sketches for placing into a head and shoulders portrait or full length portrait, and he'd get some of his team to actually paint in the dress or the suit of armor or whatever. But those
Really?
were all left behind. And as you said, the executors came in at the end and said, we've got to pay for his debt somehow. Let's get all these pictures sold. But for goodness sake, team, finish them off. So we see them the whole time coming in. Lawrence's fantastic heads with Laura Ashley dresses bunged on, which just look ridiculous. Luckily, we do have the wherewithal to actually most of the time take off the Laura Ashley dress and expose the little sketch. And yes, we've had sketches from Van Dyck, and I love seeing. And Van Dyck's my hero anyway. But you can see how he works with such confidence and experience are two things that actually I should have said earlier on. Having the confidence to actually clean pictures and have that nerve, which you just talked about, two things. But having an artist with confidence and experience as well is something beyond belief. But Van Dyck is that man. His teacher, Rubens, did head sketches. But he was interesting because he would see interesting people in the street and say, "Oi, can I give you £5 and I'm just going to pay, I'd like to paint your head so that I can use it in a couple of pictures I'm doing." And there's a wonderful letter from him writing when he lived in the country, writing to his studio in town to say, "Could you just look in the cupboard and bring out that gnarled old man's head? I need to put him into St. Sebastian or something like that." And so he had a cupboard full of head sketches of characters, not necessarily of people he was commissioned to paint. And there's a subtle difference there, I think, of what we're exposed to. But again, it's that wonderful moment of seeing somebody load up a brush, put it on, leave it, have the confidence. And if you look closely at some of these artists, it's absolutely crazy what they think is finished. A little wet art, little highlight in the eye, completely, it looks like a fly has sort of drilled a hole into your eye or something like that. It's just extraordinary sometimes. And yet it works.
Those Rubens studies were quite often on big panels, just lots of heads. And if you'd seen them in his studio, it would look like a painting of floating heads. And then after he died, they chopped up the panel and then incorporated those heads into a bigger picture. So someone would put in their hands, for example. And now we're going around trying to sort of unwind that process. In fact, Van Dyck did similar. And do you remember many years ago, I brought you a head study, which was by Van Dyck. And it was a head of a random man who'd been turned into St. Peter with the addition of a pair of quite shonky keys.
Yes.
And you could see on the panel where the wood had been dropped in.
Yeah.
And do you remember?
Yes.
We chopped it out. I think actually you chopped it out. I didn't. I didn't do that.
Yeah, I didn't let you do that. Taking that back to how it should have, how it was painted, was quite fun, and we managed to get it back and take all the overpaint off, didn't we?
Yeah, and you were so kind because it was about the time I got married, and you You made up the remainder, the added bit of the body with the keys and the hands, into a mirror, and it was a wedding present for us. I've got it. I'll put a picture of it on YouTube if anyone wants to see that.
A wonky
Is listening.
Yeah. But yeah, that was fun. I mean, that was very typical of what does happen to some pictures. Well, even, for instance, even in Rembrandt's time, even when he was alive, his pictures were being sold all around the world. He's top of his game. Even in his lifetime, his pictures were changed. The shape of them would change because it didn't fit above the door. So a little bit was cut off, or they'd be made into an oval. Quite extraordinary. We wouldn't do that to David Hockney, would we? If we bought a David Hockney landscape and say, sorry, we didn't like the trees, we'll just take those off. Quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose the way art was seen as to be less sacrosanct explains why it could, as you say, go through the mill so often over the centuries.
Yeah.
I do want to mention my all-time favorite example of botched restoration and overpaint was the painting of a bridge in Derby Museum, which we did for the BBC series. Do you remember that one? It was by Joseph Wright of Derby. And we started cleaning it, and it was actually in quite good state underneath, but it had I think it was a local artist had befriended the director of the museum in the 1950s or 60s or something. And misguidedly, they'd let her in and she thought she could improve all these amazing paintings.
Yeah.
But I think you struggled to believe me when I first presented that picture to you in the studio.
Oh, it looked like a poor Woolworth's print. It looked awful. But Diane, I mean, this is where connoisseurship really pays off, because you scanned that picture with your eyes and you saw something in the bottom right-hand corner where the artist had scratched into wet paint, which was a telltale sign of Wright of Derby and how he paints water. How he will paint on waves, paint on the color of the water, highlights and that sort of thing, and then he'll turn his brush around and scratch some of the movement of the water into the wet paint. And you spotted that. A lot of it had been overpainted, but there was a small area bottom right. And so with that in my mind, I thought, well, okay, Bendor's not completely mad. There might be something under here that is worth getting to. But the sky had been overpainted. There was no reason for doing it. There was no damage. But underneath the sky, the artist had used a very exaggerated palette of colors, which had in turn probably changed color a little bit in time. And it was really quite bright purples or pinks.
It was an Italian at sunset, wasn't it? Because it was a bridge outside Rome, and it was a kind of one of those hot Italian summer nights. And I think the lady in Derby who had restored it tried to make it look a bit more like a bit of Derbyshire.
It was quite shocking. The difference was quite shocking. And that's how would you expect it? And sort of rather crazy things with the overpaint. The overpaint had painted over the river going underneath the bridge, and the water was flowing uphill. Do you remember?
That's right, it was, yeah. It didn't make any sense at all. But that was a fun one. In fact, I do know, I think there's more pictures in Derby Museum still waiting your pleasure. Because I think this lady was let loose over a number of years.
Yeah, no. It's such a shame. And so therefore you could very easily see why something is demoted, and in our collections, why it's being put down in the cellar and waiting there now. Thank goodness we can see them all on photographs on this website called Art UK. And one of the other ones, which was a picture that turned up at the studio from Birmingham Museum in a black refuse bag, 2 planks of wood, because of the panel, which was 4 feet by 2 feet, had broken and had been left in a drawer in the basement since 1960.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, that was by Jan Bruegel the younger, wasn't it? That was a beautiful picture.
And
yeah, it looked like a bit of a sort of fruit crate or something. Just two planks of wood. You could hardly see anything. But I remember we identified a particularly finely painted cow's bottom, didn't we? And that gave us our first clue.
But then we did other things as well. And this is where the fun, or sort of slightly tedious fun, comes in, where we actually do box ticking. We'll do X-rays, and we'll do special types of photography, infrared. And we did the infrared on that one, and you could see the drawing.
So, Simon, we've discussed peeling back a painting. Yeah. And as we near the end of our chat, I think we should then move on to that very delicate process of when you have to start putting things back.
Mm.
And I remember one of the most popular scenes we had in Britain's Lost Masterpieces when you were retouching a painting by, I think it was Francesco Trevisani, and there was some damage in the face. And it was just the viewers, and I loved it. We all loved it. We just had the camera on watching you put in the tiniest little dots. And then over the minutes, suddenly her face came together. And I think that's one of your most magical skills. How were you an precocious artistic youth? I mean, where did you get that skill from?
I was taught to make things by my grandfather, who I loved hugely. And I was always in his workshop. He had a workshop in a wonderful old manor house, which was a dining room. He decided to take the dining room out. He had two dining rooms. And he put a workshop in there. There was a smell of wood glue in his house, and wood shavings all around the place, and things being mended, and him tapping away with a chisel. And it made me love things that you can make. And yeah, I went, no, was I precocious? No, I wasn't very good at painting or anything like that, but it's putting things together, restoring things. As you say, a few little dots can make such a difference. Just suddenly the three dimensions of a face come back. I'll tell you a wonderful experience I had, and it was an experience years ago, restoring Franz House. I may have told you the story, and his wife, apparently. Anyway, they came in as a pair. And the best times of my day are early in the morning before anybody gets in, and when everybody's gone home. It's a bit peace and quiet. The phones don't ring, and I can put on a nice piece of music and have a nice glass of wine and look at what I'm doing and concentrate for maybe half an hour, three-quarters of an hour, an hour. And I remember restoring or retouching this Franz Hals and using a tiny little brush. And their brushes are tiny. I haven't got one here, but a few little hairs on the sable hairs on the end of a brush, bringing out the colors and putting tiny little spots on the painting using exactly the same muscles that he had used. And
Hmm.
my phone rang at 12 o'clock from my wife saying, "Where the hell are you?" And I'd been in this world. I can only describe it as being transformed in time back to his studio. And I was in the presence of him. He was using my muscles to do exactly what he did back then. And it was just, it makes the hair on the back of my head stand up now. And it was one of my really personal best moments, just to be in the
Hmm.
presence of somebody so great and understanding what it was that he wanted, knew exactly what he wanted.
So you were channeling him for 6 hours that felt more like 10 minutes.
Yeah. I literally thought I'd been
Yeah,
there for 5 minutes. Yeah.
amazing. Is that a frustration though of being a restorer? Is that in a way the hallmark of brilliant restoration is that we never see you, you never get recognised.
There is that. And actually, funny enough, I thought you were going to come up with another. It is frustrating because we are actually, in a way, creating or we're recreating what has been damaged and trying to understand the artist. And I think a lot of restorers have actually turned into, dare I say it, um, quite creative with their own skills of what they know, fakers. So if you look at some of the great fakers throughout history, they are people who've understood art and have made their own paintings in the style of Rembrandt or whatever.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
that's
Are
another
we
story.
are we building up? Are we building up to a confession here, Simon?
Oh, I got one there. No.
That Rembrandt that made £7 million in London in December, was it really that lost Rembrandt? Was it really one of yours?
Well, if you looked under UV, you'll probably find my signature there somewhere. No, it's always quite
Oh,
curious to see. I go to collections occasionally. I suddenly look around and I suddenly see something I know, and I suddenly think, yeah, I restored that. Yeah, interesting. It's
wow.
like seeing an old friend or a distant cousin. Um,
Yeah.
it's a lovely life, and I've had a long time doing it now. And as I say, I'm trying to infuse other people to do what I find fun and interesting as well. It's a great life.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Simon, I've been lucky enough to learn at the feet of some great people in the art world, but I have learned, you have taught me the most because connoisseurship is so dependent on understanding a picture's condition. And standing over your shoulder, as you've been so patient with me and so generous, because not all restorers like people watching. You've always let me watch and learn. And as you peel back the layers, it's absolutely fascinating. I'm so indebted to you. And I think we probably should end there. Or we did say we would talk very quickly about modern and contemporary art. And I've noticed a trend over the last 20, 25 years I've been in your studio of more and more sort of contemporary works coming in. You probably can't say any names, but just tell us, am I right in thinking that modern contemporary artists aren't making their pictures to last as well as they should?
I think you're right. I think there was certainly in the last quarter of the 20th century, traditional skills weren't taught. Certainly drawing wasn't taught. And the next generation find it actually quite difficult to actually bring that back in because nobody had been taught to draw or use traditional skills. I think they are being put in there now. And anyway, yes, freewheeling and using whatever you want to use on a work of art is annoying because we have to try and conserve it. And sometimes I think, why? And is it really worthwhile? But we do. So we stop it from falling apart for another 10 years, and then we have to do the whole thing again.
So, for example, if you use like the kind of paint you get down at B&Q, Dulux paint, on a piece of artistic canvas, it's not going to bond for more than what, sort of 30, 40 years? It'll start to crack.
Yeah, it depends which paint you're talking about. Some of the emulsion, the water-based paints, yes, they're not going to last very long, but they just discolor as well. As we know, you have to paint your house every 10 years. It starts to look all grey and discolored and brown, as our old varnishes used to go. But yeah, there are some of the contemporary artists are using things like chocolate. That's not going to last. We know that. So we try to stop it we take the oxygen away from it and put it in a sealed box with a glass front, so it doesn't get any oxygen, doesn't oxidize.
Yeah.
Dealing with, as I call them, sticky art. I mean, there's an artist that I work with regularly, and he's one of these enthusiastic people in his studio. Paint, 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 and then he stands back to look at his pictures, but he always stacks his paintings behind him. He hasn't learned to move those paintings, so once every year he'll say, "Oh, I've done it again, Simon. I've walked back into a stack of pictures, and you've got this shape of a heel going through 3 paintings." What did you learn?
Do you know, in 200 or 300 years' time, that'll probably be like a signature hallmark for attributing the works to this particular artist. It's got the stamp of the heel,
Yes.
bottom left-hand corner. And very quickly, Simon, yes, I don't think you can mention the artist or the name of the artwork, but that piece of canvas that was covered in bits of toast, and one of the bits of toast had come off. And is it true that you'd had to make your own bit of toast in the studio to put it back on?
It was very hard work, to do that.
You had to get it burnt just the right way.
We had to do the right sort of sourdough, and then I think we actually used some pigment in the end. But no, it was a bit strange. It wasn't a particularly great work of art. But yeah, they wanted it restored.
Well, I should probably let you go now before you get into any more trouble with your contemporary artist clients. But Simon, thanks for letting us see into your world. That was really good fun. Thank you very much.
No, great pleasure.
Waldy and Bendy.